look at a screen other than the Hangout yourself, but then you don't know for sure that it's showing the right thing.
Exactly. Okay. So everyone, welcome to the second Hangout that we're having for the Selenium group. Today I wanted to cover some best practices, but before we get started, we had a lot of information last time, so I'd like to ask if there was any questions, or maybe if you had used the project a little bit more in your off time, maybe you had a question about that. Anyone? Okay. Okay. All right. So I suppose let's just get started here. So this is really not going to work unless everyone has a project set up. I guess you can follow along if you don't have a project set up. Contact me after, and I'll let you know the steps on how to get this set up. Basically, I'm going to go through this project here. This is the new updated version of the stuff that we worked on last session, and I put a lot of more best practice revolving, concepts around the actual project structure. So most of the things are the same. We had our getting started class right there. So I've added a little bit more. So I wanted to discuss a little bit more about this project structure. So to have an effective and reliable test suite, you need to have things structured in a logical manner. So today in this meetup, we're actually going to be automating GitHub. If you're not familiar with it, that's okay. We're just going to go through some unauthenticated UIs just to play around with it. So if you look at this structure here, basically we have an app folder, which is actually going to be the name of your app. So you'll tailor this entire directory hierarchy to your actual app. So if that's going to be GitHub, we can name it GitHub, and also we have some functional areas. So this could be, if you have an application that has search areas, then you can have search, and then etc. So since we're going to start out with GitHub, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some two tests that I have here. Smoke tests and explore tests. So you can see the naming convention. Again, in a logical manner, you really want to include tests appended, as a suffix to your test classes. It keeps things clear, so you know exactly what they are. So we can take a look at a smoke test and do. So this is a workshop. We're all going to do this together, and kind of cover some more, basic concepts and things. So the smoke tests are very simple tests. They're going to cover the very basic of functionality. And in this case of GitHub, we're basically going to validate some terms of service, make sure that they show up, and the test privacy policy. Just two sample test methods that we have here. And so we can take a look at more about this structure here. So these test methods, you can see that they're prefixed by the name test. That's another common practice that you should use with organizing your test structures. So every test method should be prefixed with test, and your test class should be suffixed with tests. So I also like to say, last time, if you don't remember, we had our getting started class. This is actually extending automation tests. I've actually changed that to extend a common class, which is again a best practice. You want to extend all of your tests from a base class that you're going to, that's based on your app. So in our case, if I actually go to the GitHub automation test class, this extends from automation test. But what it does is provides a config where we don't have to provide that information to each single test. And in this case, we're going to the GitHub URL and we're using Chrome. So back in our smoke test, again, this is going to be a very basic sweep of the app. We can create more methods later, but what we're going to do right now is kind of do this together. So our task is to validate that when we click the terms of service, we get redirected correctly. So whenever you're writing a test, our first thing to do is go with it manually. We need to actually go to the actual browser and basically follow along manually so we know what we're writing. So what I'm going to do here is go to GitHub. Oh, you're going to see this. So basically, we're going to click this, terms of service, and this privacy policy, and basically our task is to validate that these pages exist. And that's basically a very clean sweep of the application. It's not going to go deep into functionality. We're just going to provide a sanity type of testing on it. So let's see here. So in our test here, the question is, okay, validate that when we click the terms of service, we get redirected correctly. So since our application extends from GitHub Automation Test, as soon as we run any test, it's going to appear on GitHub. We're going to be on GitHub. So what we're going to do is replace this to-do with our actions. So when we validate, we're going to click the terms of service link, and we're going to validate that we're there. So our first actual action here is to click. So the question is, what are we going to click? So if you remember last time in Chrome, you can double click or right click, sorry, and inspect element to get some CSS selectors. But what I'd say is this is also part of the best practices thing. We could use a CSS selector for this, but is it always necessary? Probably not. It might be a little bit more convoluted than necessary. So what we can actually do is using just the link text. I'm sure there's no other link on here, this page, that says terms of service. So we can actually utilize Selenium and just click by that link. So how we can do that is just by that link text. And this, of course, will match what the actual text of the link is, which is terms of service. With no capitals, and there are spaces between the words. So it needs to be exact. If it is not exact, then this will, of course, not work. So now that we've clicked the terms of service, we can go ahead and follow that manually. So if you're going to GitHub, looks like it brought up a new window. This is our original tab right here, and it brought up a window. So what I'd say a sufficient test would be is, this is a smoke test. We're going to make sure that the page exists. I'd say that text right there, GitHub terms of service, is probably sufficient to say, yes, this functionality is working. So there's a gotcha here, and I note this here, is a new window does open, and it is handled a little bit differently. So when we click that terms of service, we expect a window to appear, and it gives you a nice utility method called wait for window. Basically, what this will do is let you specify regular expression, and the regular expression would be the either the title or the URL of the window. So if you're sufficient and good at regex, this should be very simple for you. But we're going to do basically just very vague wildcard searches. Okay, so what window are we waiting for? We are waiting for the GitHub Terms of Service window to appear. I'd say we can do this title here. The title of the tab is GitHub Terms of Service. So we can use that. So let's just observe the casing here. So capital GitHub Terms of Service. So we can wait for window. Now, if you do not know regex, this will be a little bit confusing, but basically this is the wildcard for any character, any amount. And we're going to look for GitHub Terms of Service. And then a dot star at the end. What that basically means is we're going to not care what's before, and we're not going to care what's after. And that's going to wait for that window, that tab, to appear. So beautiful thing about this framework is that it will wait until that window appears. I strongly urge you, when you have this project, look at the actual source of these functions here, like click and wait for window. There's a lot of back-end stuff going on that's making sure that anytime you interact with any element, it's going to make sure that it appears and is ready to be interacted with. That's the most important part. A lot of feedback that I received from the first meetup, and constant issues that I hear arising from Selenium is Ajax, and Ajax definitely is a potential roadblock for our automated testers. So if you actually look at the code behind the stuff, like the wait for window, the click, you'll see what kind of stuff you can do to actually make sure that your elements appear before interacting with them, which will eliminate any hiccups that Ajax could cause. So now that we've waited for the window to appear, by the time we get to this next statement, the window has appeared and is ready to be interacted with. So what we're going to do is, like I said, this is a smoke test. We're just going to validate that some text is present. So if we look at the text here, we're just going to validate that this here exists, that text. This is very simple. You can copy and paste it inside of here with validate text present. That just makes sure that some text appears, and you can just paste it right in there. So you can see, for those of you who are new here to this meetup, this framework right here provides you a nice, clean way of executing tests. It's very, step by step, and it's very readable, human readable. So you can see that the first thing we're going to do, click terms of service. We're going to wait for the window to appear. Then we're going to validate that the text is present. If that text is not present, the test will fail. If it is present, the test will pass. So if you're following along with me, you can click run on this test and watch magic happen. Okay, you can see Selenium 2 is extremely fast. So that test took 6 seconds, and our test had passed. All tests passed. Alrighty, here. Okay. So any questions about this test method here, or anything that I've discussed so far? There are no bad questions? No? Only wrong ones. Okay. Yeah.
I had to make it forget the Wi-Fi. I think it might have confused guests with someone
Yeah,
else.
because the passwords do change frequently on these guest networks. Did you use this one?
Yeah, and I was able to log in. I can get the page, and it's just slow.
Yeah, I mean, I had gone to some other site that had the same, had guest list.
Oh,
Again, like,
so you had,
Apple doesn't know how to
Yeah.
differentiate it, so it's not
No, it's connected. Just 10 minutes to download it.
Oh,
It's a try.
that's not right, yeah.
Yeah.
that was slow for me too. With the initial thing. But yeah, if you just forget the network and re-add it.
Yeah, you can go ahead and try that. Yeah, Eclipse is set up to run on that as well. Are you having problems?
I tried one and I can switch between
JUnit test. Yes, these are JUnit tests. Yeah. Yeah, I tried to be agnostic with what IDE. If someone was using a previous one, they could use it.
Some of the extract my configuration.
What's that?
code stuff. So, very close to it.
You mean how to set it up?
Yeah.
That was in a previous email. Like I said in the email that I just sent out today, if you guys are having problems or wanting to reinstall it, you don't have to reinstall it or anything. You can use the same setup, but you'll just need to add a project to it. Okay. Okay, so now we have our first test here. That's very brief, very fast. That's what smoke tests are supposed to be. This is the kind of test that would be run, after a build is pushed out to production or something. You could kick off a smoke test and make sure that the basic functionality is working. Is there anything to add to that?
That's about it. Yeah, just to validate the build is successful.
Yeah.
Very broad, shallow set of tests.
Yeah.
Again, if you want to do multiple validations in this test case,
Yeah.
Let's say it's failed, or let's say if the validated text doesn't pass, then you just continue on to the next line, or if it failed, kills the test case right there.
If it fails, if that text was not present, then it would kill right there. They'll say your test has failed. Yep.
Like if it didn't open the extra tab, it would get stuck in that
That's right.
step.
Yes.
So it would never actually get to that next, the validated text present. So yeah, the test would fail already at that line. Want to make sure.
And if you'd like, I can show you that. So I'm just going to add 2 underscores at the end of that, and then put something like just click another thing here. All right. So if I run this, forward along, immediately it says assertion error, validate text present. Then you can go through the stack trace and kind of you can see that when I double click this error, it went straight to this line. So validate text present. You can see that failed. So there were here at ProQuest, we actually used something long time ago that was kind of a persistent feature. It's not a great feature when I think about it, but basically, say you had a lot more functionality that you wanted to test in the same test, and if you didn't care if something failed, you just wanted to continue on statements. I'd recommend, since this meetup is supposed to be about best practices, I'd recommend getting away from that. Because you really want to keep your tests very simple, small, and efficient. The smaller your test, really the better. So that shows you what happens when it does fail. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, for those of you who have this project set up and just ran it and it ran just fine, what I'd like to have you guys do is do this next one yourself. It's extremely similar to what you just did. And if you do not have a computer, then turn to the person next to you and kind of work together on this. I will say that it's going to be very simple for you. I'm going to allot 5 minutes to do that. It shouldn't take very long. All right. So if you guys want to do that, I can see that you have some problems.
Yeah, well, okay.
Do you want to go around open them? Sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
We're still trying to
We're
still trying to download the file.
No.
Who's this library?
It's in the Maven Central repository. Do you have Apache Maven on Eclipse?
So you don't have it in GitHub?
It is in GitHub. Yes. The project is in GitHub. But this project we're using right now is using an artifact that I've published to the Maven Central repository. It's brought in by Maven as a dependency. So if you want to download it, you can look at Maven, or you can look at my D. Davison GitHub profile, and you can find Getting Started with Selenium. That's what this project is called. Okay, and it's actually the Dash framework, by the way. So okay.
Yes, I think it's just.
Oh yeah. I've had. You do have a JDK on this. JDK right there. Yeah.
Oh, you haven't said that.
Yeah.
That's not for
So it's working now. Okay, we can try that. Do you have internet access right now? I see this join this time. So.
Yeah, it wasn't super fast, but.
And I'll come over and help you out if the project is still having issues. Nothing.
But it's saying,
This is not the work.
well,
Oh, okay. You should need to set it. Then it can be the set the sounds.
So, is this from last year? Did you download the zip file today? So where did you?
So that's what you had.
Last week.
You were just trying to reset.
The first one. Yeah, that one. Yeah. Sorry.
Did you? But you were running it just fine. You were.
Oh. Try to there. Okay, so. Okay, so you're missing.
So he added.
Just wait for the use that.
Oh no, I didn't need it.
yeah, that's fine.
Oh. Excellent. Last one. I'm guessing most of these issues that you guys are having is because of last session. I didn't really provide instructions on what to do. Oh. I'm just fun to just follow along.
I'm having issues too. I'm okay. Personally, I'm okay just watching what they do. That's there. But it would be nice to.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
I mean, the idea, well, it's also slow getting the internet. Seems slow, but I think the idea was just to essentially do the same task for the policy. Yeah.
Figure it save, at least,
Yeah. Yeah, this seems to be common. I'm going to, after this meetup, I'm going to, I kind of started from where we were last time. I will take down my entire workspace and then kind of build it from GitHub, how I had you guys do it, because apparently I didn't test it thoroughly. Okay, so did everyone, not everyone, but the POM file is, yeah, how do you bring the stuff in? Yep. Okay, so
Is it working on anybody else's? Does everybody have the same? Is it just it's working for you?
yeah, I think it's only the people that showed up last time. And IntelliJ kind of,
Yeah, my clone installed.
oh, from the guest network. Jeez.
what are you saying, like, the old one?
When we did the last meetup, yeah, I didn't really provide instructions on how to, have multiple projects. Okay. So for those of you who had who were able to do this, basically, oops. So following along manually, what we would do is click privacy policy. We can do the exact same thing we did above there. Click by link text, privacy policy. And after we click that, we wait for window again. But if we do click this, it gets here. So we wait for window. And the window title, oh, that's right. I copied the text from the page. It needs to be the window title. So, and the title is GitHub privacy. It's, okay, it's the same thing. But again, it's using regular expressions, so we need to put wildcards in there. And again, with the terms of service for the privacy policy, we're basically just going to do the same thing. We're going to validate that this text is present. Now, did anyone do it differently? There are several ways to do this. I'm just curious if anyone had their own way of doing it. For example, instead of using by link text, did you try something else like an XPath selector or a CSS selector? Okay.
The way I usually do it, I use it as a moving statement. So I look at the text and validate.
Sure. There you go. Yep. Okay, so again, that was some smoke tests just to cover the basic functionality of the actual GitHub app. And I know that's extremely slim. I know we've only covered 2 things, but you get the gist of it. So you it's your responsibility as an automated tester to kind of figure out what your core areas are. It's going to be, searching. It's going to be logging in. That's for sure a big one if you have authentication. But it just gives you a general outlook on the stability and quality of your app. And this should run very short. It should your test should be extremely simple, short, and runs very fast. If you do have very short and fast smoke tests, then you're doing the right thing. Because once you run, say you do publish a production app and you want to test immediately, you run that smoke test app, it's done in less than 4 minutes or something. Now you have a general outlook on how well your app is responding to the user. Okay, so I put some more things in here. So like I said, you have a functional area. We had smoke test under that functional area, and this is very vague, but basically, again, you would have something like search or something like authentication. You want to organize your app in a way that's logical. So you have your base package, which is app, which in our case would be GitHub, and then the functional area. So within that functional area as well, I have another test class called explore tests. Now, explore tests is basically it's not going to be smoke test. We're going to kind of make it a little bit more more difficult. It's kind of getting more advanced on this. So it's definitely going to be a lot more different than the smoke test. It should run longer, but it should not be running so long. I think probably rule of thumb, if it's running past 10 minutes, it's way too long. So keep your tests very short and simple, and kind of organize and modularize your tests so they're in a logical progression manner. So again, we'll be automated GitHub here, an open source website, hosts many open source projects. This one's gonna be a little bit more trickier. What we're gonna do is actually we're gonna cover basically this stuff right here that you see, the tasks. We're going to be going to the most trending open source project on GitHub right now, and we are going to basically do some validations. We're going to click the trending tab. We're going to open the most trending open source project. We're going to store the name of the project inside of a variable to validate it later. Then what we're going to do is validate that the URL is actually, it has that project name in it. So this is an 1.5 hour long meeting. I think I'm going to probably take it a little bit more slow. I think what I'm going to do is have people try it on this by themselves again. We can use some of this time to get people that don't have their workspaces set up. I'm extremely sorry about that. I can work on that next time. So why don't we go ahead and do that? So the tasks are right there from GitHub. You're going to click the Explore button. You can do that any way you please, using a CSS selector or otherwise. So in the meantime, help some people. And before, is there any questions about this? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. So what's that?
I'm just looking at the difference between the old one. There's like a Maven IO. Is that the same?
Good question. I don't think it would be. If it's in the under the .idea directory, I don't believe it is.
So the kids, I was able to just delete my old project, re-import it, and everything seems okay. I don't know if just deleting the project.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that? We tried like just completely removing that
So
project from your environment
Yes.
for re-importing the file. I did that in Eclipse and it worked for me, but I don't know how much different the code is.
So I wonder if it goes.
Like a click, yeah. Click window.
Yeah, like, I don't know if you created this.
It's yeah. So the coach goes to That'll provide that's the actual one that has all the clips, all the drawings, stuff. Cool, thanks. Yeah. They're looking for Selenium. It doesn't matter. If you hover over it, it'll say the archive master. So that actually downloads the list. Yeah, and then that's not that. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So did anyone have any questions that didn't make the last meetup on how to find your elements? Is anyone like in a roadblock right now? So what we're going to do right now is click on that button. So in our smoke test, what we did is buy out in text. We can do that if you wanted to. No, we're going to, if you scroll, if you look at the actual instructions, it says place preference. Oh, okay. We're going to go to yeah, it's the show. And then we're going to go up to started chicken. You know, in terms of actually finding the elements, were you familiar with CSS? Yeah. Again, does anyone have the roadblock right now?
IntelliJ seems to just not have the overriding project. The files are there, it's just throwing errors all over the place. It works fine in Eclipse.
Is there anything like that I just work? I've seen the last choice files that you stay with.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, it's. Click in the explore button. Turn it down. This it's a great amount of gas.
So,
I'm trying, but,
You can look at smoke testing.
well, I already set myself up.
Oh, don't worry about that. You wanna get the.
If you want,
like this.
That'd be great, yeah. Just kind of follow along with him up there. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
You're right, it's, yeah. So you just do the download zip on that page instead of.
It almost looks like, it almost looks like,
I would recommend using it.
Yeah.
They're having a
I
hard
was
time.
trying to use it intelligently, so.
Yeah.
It's not the right time for that, no?
I'm not familiar enough with it, don't you know why it's having that problem?
so now that that's a phone, because the connection time's out.
Slow internet.
I wonder if the internet is really is that close enough to the hotspots.
You know, I have good reception. I don't know much about their best Wi-Fi.
I've never actually used it.
But yeah, you're able to browse the internet. Right?
We used to get timeouts just trying to connect to it.
Or for anything.
Yeah, well, I can load pages eventually, but I was off to figure out how to set the time out to a longer time. So that
Oh, so
the
the test is
test
timing
doesn't
out.
stop. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it'll have a certain amount of time. It's going to go on.
That's one thing, like, you know, when you're using Selenium, there's a certain point where, you know, you don't want to keep increasing the timeout because at that point the page is usable. So we probably have a short one.
Yeah, so I've got to figure out how to set that because I'm trying to code it out in another language just because I haven't installed that. I'm just trying to code that. In another environment. So now it's Java. You do have Java installed. Yeah, it's simple code. You did have to wait. Was that the wait for window? Or?
The wait for window is going to do some internal waiting. That's a little bit different than the page validation we do using.
Okay, so there's a timeout. How long will you let sign out the page run for? And let's wait for window.
So how did you?
So wait for window is going to actually look for that window to appear and then
We did 3 objects and
do like a wait in between.
Is that a page load or a pop-up?
The pop up the source, yeah.
Oh,
I'm not sure what the default is for that.
yeah, because when I went to GitHub and loaded privacy policy for that, I just didn't load the pop-up.
Oh no,
So I was a little confused about
could depend on the browser you use as well.
it.
Maybe treat it differently.
That project actually doesn't exist.
Right, you said it wasn't. Yeah, I just
Yeah, rid of it.
What browser are you using?
Firefox?
Just put it on your desktop or?
Okay, I have the same issue. So you have to check which version of the browser you use.
Should be the newest.
Well, that's how. When you use the newest, sometimes it's not compatible.
On the version of the.
So you actually, for example, right now I'm using 2-point bracket.
That means use the latest 1 point. So
You have to use
So change that to one.
first version.
It's a good point, like, now our Selenium nodes, we actually shut off all the auto updates.
Yeah.
Just because,
We have
a Chrome driver, you gotta sync with Chrome. Yeah, Firefox. Well,
Go back to
they sometimes break compatibility.
So what does that say in terms of writing your tests? How many different browsers and versions are you testing against? Is that something that's
Depends on the product, I think. But we try to make sure that at least all the environments we're testing in, it won't auto update. So when we do make an update, we'll do it intentionally, not just because it's the latest version that just came out that day.
and so in your environment?
So we're more careful when we do the upgrades, and then we'll try to handle any side effects of the upgrades.
In your environment, do you only have one version of each browser set up at a given time?
And so we'll shut off the auto update on all those, and then we'll do it when it's convenient for us. Because we want to test whatever our customers use the most. Unfortunately, we still a lot of customers use the older versions. That's all.
I think that's the problem.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
So where does cross-browser compatibility fall in the testing sphere?
The way they react.
So how do you plan for that in your test?
So, for example, like a drop down. So you have a drop down, the way that they display in the drop down from Chrome to like your Internet Explorer are different. You have like the developers have to be very specific to how they react.
A lot of times for us, it'll be manual testing that will catch those browser compatibility issues. It may function nice, but it just really ugly the way that it displays it. So they have to update the CSS or their HTML to make it look correct in that particular browser.
Yeah, when somebody was hypothesizing the pop-up window because of the browser. I mean, that's just completely that's just completely weird.
Yeah, yes. There's a lot of strange things that can happen just from a simple upgrade of the browser in the way the page functions. Because there's different ways that they may be actually handling those clicks internally. If it's like JavaScript or something that's running in it could get broken.
No, it's just a win.
Could be the redirect part.
Please join me this question. This vision of screenshots.
Yeah, so just do that. You can actually go to Selenium. So they have the browsers there. Just buy again.
Yeah, I don't want to bump my version of Firefox down to 27 to work with Selenium 2.4.
Well,
That seems a little overkill.
So if you can spec.
the one that I'm using.
So right click it on.
I'm using version 3031.
You might be able to do
Firefox version?
say by link text.
So 2.4 supports Firefox 27, and it's 2.43.
That's actually the newest update.
So what I guess I need to figure out when Selenium 2.43 was released in order to know what to work with. Is there a good reference you can recommend? It's starting to seem insane. If Firefox will automatically update,
Well, you have to like, I guess, up that of the automatic. You can actually
So most of our testing we do on Chrome. That's our primary platform that we do And so we basically shut off the auto update on Chrome because Google will release a Chrome driver, which will be compatible with certain range of versions of Chrome. But if it auto updates, it's going to jump ahead before we actually upgrade the Chrome driver. So Google's putting out those updates for us to support the newer versions of Chrome. We just have to actually add them into our environment before we test those newer versions.
Yeah, I can understand that. It's an interesting situation because I am running on a personal computer, which I want to run my business, but I need to figure out what my WebDriver installation is compatible. And I'm not finding, so, you know, in their documentation page or the platforms page, it only references an old version from February. So I need to figure out.
The one that I'm using, it's 2.42.2, and it's very stable. So I haven't updated to the new version because I know this one gets the job done.
They haven't updated that page.
So I see that. Next step is figure out what Chrome browser.
Yeah, they haven't updated
Yes.
Basically, I just that version did not have an inheriting, you know, they already have interface for the application. Did not have, it could not pass down to the child. So it was, yeah, just do one for it. Keep on. Oh, yeah, 12, yeah. The version 12 did not really come out. But I'm sorry. I'm going to do 7. We need to do 15. So I'll go ahead and do this here. So basically, we're going to click the Explore button at the top of the page. We'll click the Trending tab. We'll open up the most trending open source project. We'll then store the name, and then we will validate that the URL ends with a variable. So we click. Again, depending on what element you're actually trying to click, you'll again go to the actual thing, follow it manually. You're going to right-click and inspect your element and see what we can use here. So here, header nav link, href explorer. Okay, we can use by link text since the text of the link is actually explore. That'd be easier. Then we'll click the trending tab. After we click it manually, follow along with our automated test. We're going to click this button here on the right, the trending, inspecting it. So if we look here, it looks like the text is trending. So we can again use by link text. So just to make sure that our test works, a good practice for you to do is just kind of, as you're writing your test, go ahead and go through it, run it, make sure it works. So just this test is going to click 2 links, just making sure that it works from that point on. Okay, looks like it didn't have any problems with it. So we'll continue. So we'll open up the most trending open source project. I'm sorry if it was a little poorly worded, but what I meant was basically when you're in this trending page, if you click it, you're going to go to this repository here. So in terms of best practices, when you have when you have dynamic data, this is one of the most troublesome parts of test automation, is that tomorrow this could change to something else. The next day it could change to something else. But all you want to do is make sure that the top repository is going to direct to a URL and have that repository name inside the URL. That's basically it. So we could, should we use by.link text? What if that repository is not appearing on the top, and then our test is invalid? So that's part of the test dependency and test independency here. We just want to use some sort of selector that identifies it as the first link. We don't want to use the text. So we can go ahead and inspect this. So it looks like href here, so repo list name. So this is going to be a little bit trickier. We can do this either in XPath or CSS. We cannot use it in the base things like by.id, by.class name. We have to use the CSS selector here because of the dynamics of this page. Like I said, it could be any number of repositories that appear here, or it could be in any order. We just want the first one. It doesn't matter as long as it's the first one. So by traversing this HTML here, all I want to do is find the parent. And a good way to look at this is look for LIs. Usually when something appears in a list, it'll be in a list item. So if I go ahead and just collapse these things, okay, all right, I see a bunch of different things here. Yep. So the ID, I could use the ID, but do I want to? Again, that could appear on a different page, page 2, and then our test would fail. That's part of the data independency that we want to maintain our tests at. So with this in mind, using CSS, we can actually use some parent selectors and target selectors to kind of pick the first one in a list. So what I could do is kind of plug in here. I wonder if they have jQuery on this. So I would not recommend using XPath, and that's a great question. And the reason why is because you can use what you want. If it makes sense to use XPath in your current line of work and what everyone else is doing, fine. But I recommend CSS because it's much cleaner than XPath is. I can show you an example in this console here. So this is an XPath selector. This is a CSS selector. Much simpler. And yeah, so it's just much simpler. So I definitely recommend using CSS. But if you want to use XPath, go ahead. So using a CSS selector, we can find the OL parent and then the first LI. So if I hover over, see how it goes, the first one, the second one. So I'm just going to want the first one. So OL class of repo lists. Typically good sites will have something that you can use, usually jQuery. Let me try something real quick. OL. Cool, look at that. All right, so you're actually able to execute arbitrary CSS selectors inside of the console of this inspect element. And if this is not showing, then what you can do is click this little button on the right to show it. That button right there will show that console. So if you want to follow along with me. Basically, I can execute, this is JavaScript, by the way. I'm executing the $, which is a function that takes a string as a parameter. The string is a CSS selector, so I can kind of test my CSS selectors out. So OL, I can use OL, but what? Again, this is the test independency thing. What if another OL appears in the page somewhere? It doesn't now, but it might in a later time. This is the kind of concept that you'll need to keep in mind when you're automating your tests is that making sure that you're being extremely accurate and not ambiguous. You just want a very unique element. So in this case, we can kind of say, well, the class looks pretty. That class actually does look pretty unique. So we can actually do this ol.repo list. What that does is just find an OL with a class of repo-list. If you're familiar with CSS selectors, basically a space means, and following this selector, so following the ol.repo-list selector, what are we looking for? An li. So I can actually say li here. What that'll do is list every single one of them in order. But we just want the first one. And again, we shouldn't use the ID there because it is unique, but we don't care about which repository it is. So this is gonna kind of getting into some advanced CSS selectors here. How we're going to be doing this is something called the nth child pseudo element. It's hard to see there. Here, let me expand it for you guys. There you go. So it might look confusing. So basically, if you actually look at this HTML here, the li, the first one there, is the first child of this OL. So the nth child 1 is referring to the first li that's in that OL. So if I actually execute this, there's my unique one. And we're not even using an ID to get that. Now, to the same respect, you can actually do this to nth child 2 to fetch this dashboards one. And you can see when it evaluates here, we get PA-dashboards. Nth child is something we use a lot. And a lot of people would use for getting, one in a list of many. It's very good for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of navigation is set up using lists. Sometimes you need to use it in just the navigation of the page. A lot of our pages consist of content that we're serving up. So then with that child, it's very highly used in
yeah. So that's pretty unique right there. So the nth child 1. I'm curious, did anyone do something without, did anyone identify this element without using the ID? Did they use XPath? Did they use CSS? Something like this? No? Well, so that is one tough thing. Yeah, you'll need to make sure, again, that your selectors are extremely unique. This one is. It is looking for an OL. You can translate this to English. OL with a class of repo list. And following that, anywhere underneath, we're looking for an li. That's actually the nth child, the first nth child. So basically the first child.
I personally use Firebug.
Firebug, yeah. If you're using Firefox, then Firebug will definitely help you out there. There are several tools out there like look at Chrome, look at Firefox. They do have extensions for you. You don't have to type this into the console every time. You can kind of download an extension and plug in CSS selectors, just search CSS, and then you can actually do this kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is basically just copy the CSS selector. And what's my action? So we will open up the most trending open source project by clicking its title. So we're going to actually click the title of it. So what's our action? We're going to click. So basically they specify two overloads here. The first one is the CSS selector and a by. So we've been using by.linkText mostly, but what we're going to use is just CSS. So this just takes a string. So you can literally just plug and play that CSS selector inside there to click it. All right, so let me hide this here. Now that we've clicked that thing, where do we end up? Then we go manually. Go ahead and go through it manually to see exactly what happens. And again, we're trying to be very agnostic about this. We're trying to not use anything with the name, no go to fail, no names at all. We're just going to use some sort of unique selector. And that's your job as a test automation engineer to find that unique element, but being vague. I'm sorry, but being not caring about what the actual title is of it.
Specific, but generic.
Exactly.
Kind of what you have to do.
So if we inspect that element, we can pull out a CSS selector there. So again, by link text, we could click by link text again, but we don't want to. So what we're going to actually do is, okay, looking at this HTML, it's an A with a class of JS current repository. I bet that class is unique. So one thing to watch about classes is classes can be appended to anything. They don't necessarily uniquely identify the element, and that is the tester's responsibility to make sure that if they're matching on the class, that it doesn't match anything else. And that's one thing that running these CSS selectors in some sort of plugin or the console in this instance to make sure that you're getting the actual one that you need. But using that same query thing, put it up here. So the element we're looking for is an A, and then a class of, okay, so it could be two of them, JS repo home link and JS current repository. Either one really could be most unique one, so we can probably try both. We'll try one at a time though. So we can go ahead and copy that class there. Fix it in there. So we got an A for the class of JS-current-repository. So if we execute that, they returned one element, it looks like. And if we stretch this down and hover over this, it should highlight it in the page. And it does. So that's what we need. So the actual task here, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that whatever's appearing at that link right there is appearing in the URL. And you can see that no go to fail is actually appearing there. So that basically that's what we're going to do. Okay, so copying this CSS selector here. So it does say we will store the name of the project inside of a variable. There is a method in this framework. So actually, let me back here. If we follow the kind of design that's being implemented here, it's a method chaining design where we execute one statement, then again the next line we execute another. It does keep things clean, especially for a UI. If you're automating a UI. So there are two ways we could do this. We could actually break our fluency here, as we'll call it, and just that you can say string text equals get text like this. And text will have that text, but in terms of the design, this might not be the most. It might not make sense. So what I can show you is if we don't break fluency here, we can use the dot store. And the key and the value. So basically, just in Java, there's a map. It'll just map whatever you're specifying. So in our case, we're going to just name this something. We're going to name it repo title, and then what we're going to store it as. So since it takes a string, what we could actually do is the same thing we did down here to get text. plug that in as a string. Now what that's done is now repo title now equals that text of the JS current repository. Oops. Okay. So after we stored that, now what we're going to do is we're going to validate that the URL ends with the variable. So again, you could have broke fluency, just say string text, and then validate true that the URL contains or equals that string text. But what we're going to do is just, again, keeping fluency, validate URL. Again, this takes a regular expression. So if you're proficient in that, it'd be very easy. But what we're going to do here is say, what we'll do is validate that the URL ends with the variable. So if you remember what we did earlier, we did the dot stars. We're not going to care what's before. Again, we could have done this, Google slash dot, but we don't want to do that. We're trying to be very independent. We're trying to keep our tests independent. So this means anything. We don't care. And then what do we want after that? We want maybe a slash, and I'll show you why here. So the URL is https://github.com/Google. This part is what we don't care about, as long as this part here is contained in the URL somewhere. So an easy way we can do this is just validate URL slash string, then we can get the key. So whatever the key is for repo title. So in our case, it would be something like we don't care slash, what was it, no something, no go to fail. That's what we're validating right there. And this test is beautifully designed. It's not dependent on the repository that you're going to. And we here at ProQuest, we reach a lot of issues with this kind of stuff with data dependency. You run into this everywhere, really. We're trying to look for a document, but it's not the right document. So keeping it very vague but specific, like Jeff said, then you'll be in good hands. So here we're just taking the nth child. We could actually change this to anything really and it'll work, but our test, say we had acceptance criteria that we needed to meet, it was just to make sure that some document equals something. Here we're validating that the first document equals to what it should be in the search result list. So we can try to run this here. Okay. So whenever it's pausing, that usually means something's wrong. Okay. So it looks like could not find by selector a.js current repository after 5 seconds. That means we have an issue in our code. So what did we do wrong? So we clicked, first off, we clicked the nth child. I know what we did wrong. Okay, so this is something that you come along with in test automation is what element to click. If you're a web developer, you're aware that if you click an li, it doesn't do anything unless it has a JavaScript event attached to it. But what we're going to do is we're not supposed to click the li. We're supposed to actually click the a that's in it, the anchor tag. So we actually have to go back. This is the kind of stuff that you'll run into while doing your actual testing. That's exactly what this workshop is supposed to cover too. So if we go ahead and do our selector that we did last time, which was ol.repo_list and then li nth child 1. Get that li still. And then we're just going to look for an A under it. Is this unique? The answer is no, because there is 3 elements, so this is not specific enough. So the question is, which one is the right one? So what's nice about this Chrome here is that you can actually hover over these elements to see which one it is. So there's 3 links built by the actual thing. So this is here, right here, right? So see here. Okay. So in Chrome, you can actually right-click these elements that you found, and you can actually. So we want to select this one. We can right-click that again and say Reveal an Elements panel. Basically, it'll open it right back up here. That's what it did. Okay. Okay. So using CSS selectors, we only have an OL with a class of repo list. This is a little bit too, so we're looking at an OL with a class of repo list, and under that we're looking for an LI. Okay, so can we go down further? So I see an LI, I see that A is actually wrapped in an H3. So we can actually try to plug that into our CSS selector. By saying H3 space A, we're looking for now an OL3 pull list, and the first nth child LI, and then following that we're looking for an H3, then following that we're looking for an A. Is this unique? Looks like it is. So that's what we want to click. That is our selector.
Can I disagree with you?
Okay.
So, as you know, we've run into problems where a developer changes, let's say, H3 to an H2, but basic page is exactly the same, just a different tag. So one thing in this case I would suggest, use the class repo list name as opposed to the H3, just because the H3 is actual formatting of that content. And developers can very easily change that without even thinking otherwise. And this way we can avoid
that has happened to us, yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's where it is.
And GitHub does and like I said, be very cautious and vigilant about classes. GitHub, it seems like they use classes for IDs, which is interesting. But since we've already narrowed it down to the first nth child on the LI, yeah, we can look for an element that has a class of repo list name instead of looking at that H3, because yeah, it could change in the future. And you do want to have your tests look for that kind of stuff. You want to account for that kind of stuff. So it looks like we still have the same exact one. Class repo list name. All right, so there's our selector. Any disagreements? Okay. So we can click that instead. So one thing, if you weren't watching the actual video, I'm sorry, not video, on the window actually running, it pauses. Whenever you run Selenium, you'll notice stuff like that. When you're doing your debugging, you'll notice that the browser just pauses. Usually that has something to do with some element not being there that it's supposed to be there. In our case, it did click the nth child, the LI, no problem, but nothing happened. So that's where we have to actually, be more unique and this, exactly what we need to click. Okay, let's try that one.
So I think the point out is that when you don't know what's going on, it's always good to actually run it.
Yes. Yep. Setting breakpoints is a developer's best friend. Let's run this one.
Sometimes there may be a timing issue. So if the page is dynamically being loaded, stepping through debug will at least show you that your selectors are correct. It just may be a timing thing where you're trying to click something before it appeared or validate something that exists before it appeared. Yep. And then it'll also help you step through pieces.
And again, that's one thing that this framework does help you with is, and if you look at the source, I strongly urge you to, you'll see what it does. It waits 5 seconds, and if it doesn't appear, then that's too long. Your app either needs to be improved or it's possible that you just need to up your timeout to handle that AJAX stuff. Yes, because that does happen a lot. So you can see that our test does pass now. Is there any questions?
One quick question.
Yeah.
I've been in situations where I actually start using the XPath.
Mhm.
And I know that XPath is not very user-friendly for some browsers because they take a long time to load.
Sure.
Do you ever encounter some problems with using the CSS?
Yes.
That's a great question. In terms of speed and comfortability, no. In terms of usability, it can be tricky. For example, it contains pseudo-selector. In XPath, you're able to base selectors on
Content.
the content within the tag. CSS, you cannot. At least with Selenium 2. Selenium 1, you could, because it's using CSS 2. No, actually, no, it's not using CSS 2. It's using its own CSS engine. So
We found there's usually a way to create the selector with CSS and do what you could basically do.
Wow.
There was one case where we recently came across it where there was basically no identifiers that were unique for those elements. We would have like tabs on a page that there was basically nothing to identify them, and the order of them could be different depending on which document you're viewing that had those tabs. So the only way we were able to do it is by using XPath with containing that text, the title of that tab.
So
that's the one weakness with CSS.
Is there some reason you couldn't get your developers to go back and change that?
That is a really good
Because I mean, one of the things I'm hearing is it sounds
Basically-
like a lot of these best practices are end runs or testing things without talking to the developers about what to test.
If our developers,
Seems like it's some of this.
if
It's been mentioned to them.
it's been mentioned to them, that's one way you can solve it is by making sure they're putting unique IDs on these tags so that we can identify them through the HTML code that's out there. Unfortunately, in this case, we didn't have that.
So who's the audience for these tests? Because I'd assume normally they're to inform the developers and make sure things are working.
Well, I mean, they could be like a unit test that the developer would use, but in this case, these were integration tests that QA would run. And that's an organization of the structure of the organization we're working with. But in this case, there's a little bit of a disconnect there.
So it depends on the size of the application. If it's no application where you have to go and change every single thing.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, what is the purpose of a QA test? You know, not to make things work. Not to make sure
test quality. Yeah.
as an engine to itself.
Actually, I had the
Sorry, I'm not meaning to heckle you there, but it seems like, you know.
I had the same situation because before I started working where I'm working right now, they started using this tool that is called CK. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. Basically, CK goes and does all the CSS and all the graphic design and all the stuff for you, but it randomly generates a lot of the IDs and stuff like that. So if you ever had to work with that, XPath in that case would have been the best solution because it doesn't have unique IDs. So basically, every time you would go to this browser and go to this page, and you refresh it, it would change the ID.
So about the dynamic ID that you're talking about, CSS is perfectly able to handle it as well. And in a later meetup, we will cover more advanced CSS selectors. But one thing before we do run out of time here, I wanted to, I totally skipped my mind. Another great way that you can manage test your application is using libraries. If you course through the actual project directories, you could actually see source map, Java Selenium app pages. So this class here is going to be a map of things. So on homepage, for example, we got a couple static strings that we can have, and this could be a good design for anyone that's about to get started, right? With an explore link. we could do something like,
So the CSS.
yeah, yeah. I don't have it here. Hang on. Okay, let me just do this here. All kinds of ways to structure your tests. Oops. There we go. Equals. So, for example, we're using by link text Explorer, right? If we go back, I'm going to split this window so you can see it. So here we're clicking Explore. We can completely change this by saying homepage.explore. Now this is a good test design and best practice because say you have a huge suite of 1,000 tests and you're writing every single test like this. You're going to have, if one selector does change, you're going to have to go through every one of them. So using some sort of map that's mapping your application is a good practice. So if we continue, we can actually translate all these. So right now I'm using bys. You can use CSS, you can use XPath if you really wanted to, you can use it, whatever you want. And then here we're actually using privacy policy. So this was actually from the smoke tests. So this actually would be homepage.trending. Oh, no, not trending. I'm in the wrong class.
Yeah.
So smoke tests. Here we are. So instead of this, there we are. So if the text of terms of service did change, having it in a nice unified class like that would help. So homepage terms of service. Oops.
You're doing a sort of like a little global.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So if you upload it, I'm sorry, that's part of your having maintainable tests is having it in one location. If one thing does change, you can update it in your map, and it'll be reflected wherever you're using it. Oop, my phone is. There we go. And then instead of by link text, we'd use privacy policy. Again, if something does change, say for example, GitHub, say,
Capitalize.
yeah, yep, even that, yes, exactly. So terms of service, if they capitalize it, then you'd update it there. Like a loop? Each one of them? Sure, yeah. And that's, yeah, that's one thing on good test design. One thing we do here at ProQuest is we actually have all kinds of pages that actually map to each single page that we have in our application. And whenever you do a click, it would actually know, the developer would say what class you wanted to be on next, and it would actually check every single one of these, like Explore, Terms of Service, and if they don't appear, then your test fails because you could be on a different page. Different thing. So yes, you could plug that into a loop. And that is, yeah, that is a good test design there. Okay, any questions? Concerns? So I know this was kind of frustrating for most of you who didn't have your IDE set up. I hope at least this was helpful following along here. I will update this, right? Yep, I will update this in GitHub. I will send out an email. I'm going to try to delete this from my workspace. I'm going to retry it and then from Eclipse and IntelliJ and make sure it works for everybody. Because that is frustrating, and I apologize about that. But yes, this will be put into GitHub. I think I'll probably start a discussion on the meetup with all the links involved, including links to different Selenium languages like PHP, Perl, all those different binaries that you can download so you can plug it into your own automation suite. Because we're using Java here. If you're not using Java, as long as it's supported by Selenium, then, or if there's a third-party package out there, you can download.
One thing that I would recommend is if the developers are using like a certain language, like for example Java, go with Java.
Yeah.
Because you can ask for help with your stuff.
Exactly.
That's why we use Java here.
Yep.
Our development's done in Java, so we do our automation in Java as well.
And if you're a Microsoft shop, use C# or whatever they're using. Yeah. Great point. Thank you.
And also, I think there's a lot more resources for Selenium than Java.
So yes, Selenium was actually developed in Java. So yes, the most support you'll find in the online community will be for Java. So if you can fit it into your workflow, then use Java. Or if it's if you're a Microsoft shop, use something that makes sense. So again, I'll start a discussion on the Meetup group, include the links to both this and the framework that you can see, what's happening in the click, what's happening in the wait for window, that kind of stuff. And as well as the Selenium links and getting your workspace set up. I did want to.
We're going to talk about test suites.
Well, that was part of the project here. That test suite. That the organizational paradigm of this is the app, which would represent whatever you're testing. GitHub in our case. Then the functional areas would be separate packages themselves. And then how you actually organize your tests. You'd have a smoke tests in it, and you'd always suffix your test class with tests, and then prefix your test methods with test.
So you had smoke tests, which were very cursory examinations. You had exploration tests, we have them. Are there any other categories or general sections of
Sure.
best practice?
Sure. So we kind of treated explore tests kind of like an acceptance, if you will. So basically, an app, when you're developing, you'll have when you're a tester, you have acceptance criteria that it needs to meet. So the acceptance criteria, you have a bunch of numbers of things you need to check. The explore test would be the acceptance test. There's another one that's pretty nice. There's another one called workflow tests. Well, basically, a workflow would actually follow your workflow of the user. So the user would go log in. So you'd write a test on that. And that would be a sufficiently longer test than the smoke test and the acceptance tests.
Let's get back to what the test is to categories.
I'm sorry, what?
So just in the sense of what the test, you'd say there was 3 categories of tests.
Sure. Yeah.
I think, it really depends on the product that you're testing, the way the organization's set up. I think that, like for us here, that's the way that works for us. There's actually some smaller products that we might just have a smoke test suite, and we don't really have like in-depth workflow tests.
In others, we actually have products that don't have acceptance tests. You skip that completely, just have smoke tests and workflows. You want to monitor exactly what your user is going to do and make sure it works. So
yeah, it just kind of makes sense for
whatever makes sense. Yeah. And I did want to address, yes, it should be put into some requirement that your developers ID when necessary. When you select, because we've tested some Angular applications and they don't ID anything. Developers don't, so it can get difficult.
And again, I don't make a heck of you, but I know some people will very much advocate testing as part of the development flow.
Mm-hmm.
So to hear that you have a failing test that's just shrugged off, that gets back to the question of who you're testing for.
Sure.
That seems like it's kind of an important part of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
So who are you testing for?
Who are we testing for?
Yeah. How do you make sure these tests are valuable? Again, getting back to what
So we actually have two different kind of layers of testing with automation. So we're set up in an agile environment. We run Scrum. So there's actual QA people embedded on the development teams who are doing the testing as the development's happening. So at that point, yeah, they're testing for those changes that were made as part of that team, and maintaining the tests, making sure nothing's going to go at that point. But then once those Scrum teams are done, they move on to the next, new work. We don't want to just forget about those tests. So we have our automation team that continues to run these tests, triaging the issues with them. That's, I think, where we have the biggest challenge with influencing the developers who have their own goals and their own priorities. And then our automation team is trying to keep the value of these tests and keep them running while not disturbing the new development at the same time. So it's a bit of a juggling.
So could you share a strategy for actually keeping that value after the developers?
So we've had to dedicate resources to these automated tests to go through and actually make the adjustments. So when we have like a CSS locator that changes, they go in and immediately fix those. We don't let the test sit around, get stale, losing confidence from the people who are looking at it.
It's a solution of thinking in terms of it.
Yeah, a lot of people, initially think, oh, automation. I mean, we don't need all these testers. We can just automate it and then problem solve. But there really is an ongoing cost of maintaining the automated suites and keeping them running and providing value.
And in your world, then the developer makes whatever changes they want, and it's up to the QA team to change the test.
We have to kind of police them with the teams and try to work with them, which depends on the makeups of the team. Sometimes it's very successful, sometimes not so much. Yeah, it's just kind of an ongoing challenge for us.
Thanks for the few questions. Those different perspectives on who is responsible and what you have to have.
Yep. Some organizations I've been to, it's like you get development, they throw it over the wall. They don't care what happens. It's all on QA at that point. That doesn't usually work. That doesn't usually work very well. The places that have more involvement with QA development, I think that's definitely a better situation to be in.
Yeah. And in terms of audience too, kind of what we do here is we have those classifications of smoke, acceptance, and workflow. If any smoke tests do fail, that is a huge deal. So that's a build stopper right there. That means that's top priority. You need to get that fixed. Whereas acceptance, there's a crap ton of them, and sometimes they might not even be necessarily relevant anymore. So you could delete those, and those don't really have an effect on your build. But it's all dependent on what your setup, I guess, would decide what's failing and what's not, whether it's going to release your application or not. A build stopper.
Since we talk about best practices related to WordPress, this is probably just like a little quick demo. I'm pretty sure you guys got like thousands of lists. Yeah, giving you run the tests and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, we have about 20, close to 2,500 tests probably running on a daily basis. So
yeah, this is a very simplistic view. It's similar to the structure we have, just very limited functionality.
Yeah. Yes, this is in no way take this home and say, hey, we're going to use it as it is. You can use it, but make sure that you know.
There's a lot of stuff to add to it.
Wrap around things and stuff. But yeah. Here at ProQuest, we have typically most of the users that we have is Chrome. So we test Chrome mainly, but there are some apps that they're having tested Firefox and IE.
So three big ones. We test one version of each based on an automated test. We do some additional manual testing in older versions, as well as mobile. There's the ability where you can actually automate the mobile browsers as well, either through real hardware or through virtual environments. We haven't actually gotten to the point of implementing that for automated testing, but I've seen other places that have started doing that.
Yeah.
Sauce Labs is a company that basically has, I think they do physical hardware that's actually set up that you can remote into and run your tests remotely against it. There's different services out there that provide that. So it can be automated. We don't do it.
The one thing to
Sauce Lab.
Oh, really?
Based on,
We looked at Sauce Labs. We do a lot of stuff on AWS here. So we already had a corporate account for our production servers.
Amazon Cloud.
Yeah, and for us, it definitely made sense for us to have our Selenium grid kind of in-house in Amazon Cloud. It's financially better for us to do it that way. But it is a little bit more maintenance. You do need people to do the initial installation, keep the maintenance on it.
One recommendation would be kind of figure out where your main user base is coming from. If it's from IE, then you should probably test IE. If you can test them all, awesome. But whatever really comes at priority.
You find yourself writing tests in different ways depending on the browser?
That's the thing too. We've had in the past where XPath kind of bit us because IE, when you run an IE, XPath would actually take significantly longer. But in terms of writing them differently, no. That's part of best practice too. Is that you use the central CSS. Every browser that's up to date has a CSS3 engine. So if you use CSS, ID, whatever, then you can. There's really no other way that you have to.
What approach do you use to avoid redundant code tests when you have these three different browsers you're testing? So using subclasses? You said you test some things differently, but I imagine you also have a core set of things that are the same, depending on what browser you're trying.
I think we just had to change tests, some of them away from using XPath and replacing the CSS. So the tests that we have that are written using CSS, we're able to run them in all three browsers without separate functions. So it's common code between them.
Yeah. But in terms of writing differently, no. It should, as long as your developers are putting something in Firefox specific, then you got a different problem.
One thing we've had to change, going from manual testing to automated, is we actually had to change some QA testers' ways of structuring tests, just because they may write one huge test that's validating 100 different things. You don't want to put that all in a single automated test, because you break step number 5 and you got like 400 things you're not covering. So kind of helping them better understand how we structure it here, help them better write the tests from the manual perspective as we started training people how to use the Selenium.
In terms of best practices, to keep your tests independent. And what I mean by that is don't have one JUnit test wait for another JUnit test to pass.
The order that they run should.
The order should not matter. They should be independent completely. So, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Good job, guys.
It was nice.
I'll send you how I set it up for like different topics. Since some say take it, they might take it a little bit faster. One way to color. So I actually just studied that. For example, I can give it CSS selector or like expand and pass it to strategies. So what does that mean? Like it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this.
Yeah. So basically, what it does is like find this, and whatever it finds first, it, gets it done. Because I've been in situations where it's like, hey, it's right there, but it's not clicking or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
When we were
So-
using Selenium, one, we had a lot of problems because there was like 5 different ways to click things.
Yes.
And so it was very painful trying to
Yeah.
set that up.
And that's a problem because I have to validate in 4 different browsers on Chrome, Firefox, IE, and Safari. So I have to validate for all of them, and some browsers take one thing faster than the other. So it's like, all right, I don't want to waste my time.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the fluent interface like that? Method chaining. Makes things a lot easier to read, doesn't it?
Yeah, makes sense. One thing that I'm having a hard time with, and I mean, I'm just like recently with like Selenium, been working with this thing
Bye everyone that was viewing.
for like
Thank you.